You've started over a lot. We all have. New week, new routine, new commitment. And for a while it works. You feel good. You're on it. And then something happens. Life gets busy. You miss a day. And somehow one missed day turns into a week and the whole thing falls apart.
And then the story starts. You tell yourself, I'm just not a consistent person. I don't have the discipline. Maybe this just isn't for me. Sound familiar?
But here's the thing. The story is wrong. Consistency isn't something you either have or you don't have. It's not a personality trait. It's not willpower. And it's definitely not motivation. Consistency is actually something completely different. And once you understand what it actually is, the whole game changes.
Today, we're breaking down why consistency works on a brain level, a habit level, an identity level, and more importantly, why most people struggle with it and exactly what to do instead.
Later, we're going to give you a simple 3-part framework for what to do when consistency breaks: return, reduce, and ritualize. Welcome to the Mental Fitness Podcast in partnership with NUE, that's NUE, where we explore real tools and stories for building mental strength in the modern world. So let's start with what consistency actually is, because I think that's where we misunderstand a lot, where we're wrong.
Right. Yeah. Most people hear consistency and immediately think, discipline, willpower, motivation, like it's this character quality that some people just have, right?
Yeah, that's the framing is actually the thing that trips people up, because if consistency is a personality trait, then when you fall off, it just means something's wrong with you. And that's not true. For example, there's this popular story about Jerry Seinfeld using a calendar and marking an X every day where he wrote jokes, because that was his goal, is every day was to write new jokes. And the rule was simple: don't break the chain. Whether or not every detail is perfect, the principle is just consistency, and that becomes easier when it becomes visible, so which is why he used the calendar. But Jerry Seinfeld is a funny guy, but he doesn't just show up on stage and start cracking jokes. He's perfected his craft over years of consistent work. Yes, he's naturally funny, but his success isn't because of a natural funny bone. It's not just his personality. It's because of his consistency.
Wow. Yeah, I'd never heard that story. That's actually pretty cool. So like you said, it's how it's defined, it's the framework it's looked at. So here's how we would define it. Consistency is a process, and specifically the process of repeating an action often enough and long enough that it stops being a decision and starts being who you are.
I like what you said there. It's not repeating an action every single day or perfectly, but often enough and long enough. And that's a completely different lens, because a process is something that we can learn. A process is something that we can build. And a process is something that we can improve, which is what mental fitness is all about. Not having some fixed set of traits, but building capacity over time.
Exactly. So today we're going to show you exactly how consistency does that through your brain, your habits, your identity, and eventually your results.
So let's jump into the science a little bit, the why. There's a number of concepts, 4 different concepts we want to talk about. First concept: consistency rewires your brain. So let's start with what's actually happening in the brain when you do something over and over again. There's a principle in neuroscience called Hebbian learning. It's the simple version is that neurons that fire together wire together. So every time you repeat a behavior, the neurons involved in that behavior start to connect more strongly with each other. The pathway gets faster and more efficient and more automatic. This is neuroplasticity in action. Your brain is literally changing its physical structure based on what you do repeatedly. And brain scans show increased gray matter density in areas associated with practical skills. We're not talking metaphorically, we mean the actual architecture of your brain shifts. We are what we repeatedly do. Here's a quote from Aristotle I heard it was from Aristotle, and in researching it, it's actually more accurately traced to a guy named Will Durant, who was summarizing Aristotle's teachings. But I love this quote right here. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit.
Yeah, that is a cool quote. That's crazy what happens in the brain. And I think it's important to note that's of any age. You know, it's not just while you're younger and your brain is forming, but these neural pathways happen at any age. And the really important part is this doesn't require massive effort. The research on learning consistently points in the same direction. Repeated, spaced practice, you know, like we said, often enough, usually sticks better than occasional marathon sessions. So it's not the intensity, it's the repetition. So every time you do show up, even in a small way, you're literally building a stronger road in your brain. And the more you use that road, the easier it is to travel. And there's an analogy here that really kind of cemented this in my mind and helped me see it is your brain and these pathways are like a trail in the woods, right? You walk it once, you're forming this trail, nothing happens. You walk this trail every day or this path every day, then it becomes a path. It becomes a trail, and eventually it's your default route.
Yeah, I really like that analogy because the same thing with breaking old habits. Maybe you've carved a path in your brain for a habit, but if you stop traveling that, just stopping once doesn't really do much. But eventually, if you stop traveling a trail, the overbrush kind of grows over it and fills it in, and it's no longer a pathway. So it works both in a positive way of forming good habits, and it also works in stopping old habits. I used to... I remember learning recently when we were talking to a member of our clinical advisory board about addictions and how people with substance abuse addictions have literally changed the architecture of their brain. But recent research shows that's not permanent damage. The moment the addiction stops, the brain starts to heal.
So let's now transition into a little bit of the research around habit formation and relative to consistency. So here's when it gets really practical. So a researcher named Philippa Lally at University College London, she ran a study, 96 people, 12 weeks, tracking exactly how long it takes for a new behavior to become automatic. So that was a study. The answer was, on average, 66 days. So not 21 days like the old myth. And here's the range that is really phenomenal. Some people hit automaticity in 18 days. Some took 254. So there's a giant spread there. So that the finding is missing one day didn't significantly set people back, but people who were very inconsistent never formed the habit at all.
That's interesting. And I like that. So the myth that probably many of us have heard, that it takes 21 days to form a habit. I don't know if that's just not true, but I don't know. I mean, it comes from something. The range in this was that it ranged from 18 days to 254 days. So it's possible that a habit can form in 21 days, but on average it takes 66 days. And so if you're using that 3-week thing and after 4 weeks your habit's not sticking, you might just think, yeah, there's something wrong with me. But that's not the case. It's not that there's something wrong with you. It's that you might just take longer on that particular activity for it to form as a habit. And giving up too early is just, it's that pathway's being carved. It's biology. It takes time to adjust. The standard we're aiming for isn't perfection. It's really persistent return. So if we fall off, we come back. I love what you said there, that it's not missing a day wasn't the problem. It's just consistent enough. And it's kind of like that path in the woods. If you walk it every day, it's going to carve a path. If you miss one day, it's not like the brush is going to grow over that path in one day. But obviously, the more consistent you are, the better. So a habit isn't built in just a moment of motivation. It's built in hundreds of small moments where we show up over and over again. That's the second concept. The third concept is that consistency shapes our identity. So this is the layer that most people miss, and honestly, we think it's probably the most powerful one. I love in James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, that he teaches this core idea that in every action you take is a vote for the type of person that you believe you are. When you go for a walk, you cast a vote for, I'm someone who moves my body. When you sit down and do hard things, even when you don't feel like it, you cast a vote for, I'm someone who follows through.
And here's why this really matters. People who tie their habits to their identity are far more likely to sustain them. And it's not because of willpower, but it's because it would feel inconsistent with who they are to stop. It's kind of like you said, if you've built the habit of taking care of your physical health, or maybe let's say exercise, you're like, hey, my identity has become someone that takes care of my body. So I'm not going to be inconsistent with that.
I like what really stood out to me when I first read the book Atomic Habits several years ago was he contrasts the example of two people quitting smoking. And one says, I'm trying, you offer them both a cigarette, and one says, oh no, I'm quitting. And the other person says, oh no, I don't smoke.
Right.
And while the action's the same, that's completely different relationship as it relates to their identity. One is saying, I am a smoker who's trying to quit.
Right.
And the other one is saying, I'm not a smoker. Like, I don't smoke. And that kind of thing's, I think, important. So consistency is really, it sticks when we start to build our identity around it. And so we don't decide who we are and then act like it. We act, and those repeated actions, we discover who we're becoming.
So let's move into the fourth concept here is consistency builds capacity. And we've talked about capacity several times in recent episodes. This is really like the mental fitness layer being built into consistency. And this is what actually separates what we talk about from just general self-help, because consistency doesn't just build habits, it builds capacity. Each time you show up, especially when it's hard, you're training your nervous system to handle more.
Yeah, think of it like a muscle. When you're doing exercises, the reps that you do when you're tired is actually where you're doing most of the getting most of the benefit and building most of the strength. If in a set of 10, the first 7 reps are getting you tired, it's really those last few reps where you're doing all the work. The same is true emotionally. So every time we regulate our stress response and still do the thing that we're supposed to do, we're building emotional capacity. Every time we sit with discomfort and we don't quit, we're building stress tolerance. And every time that we come back to that habit or activity that we want to develop after falling off, we're building resilience.
Yeah, and this is the compounding piece. And it's not just motivational fluff here, but small actions create results, and those results create confidence. That confidence lowers the barrier to the next action. So researchers have found that each small win releases dopamine, which actually reinforces those neural pathways we talked about earlier. So the more you do it, the easier it gets to do it. So consistency isn't just what you do, it's how you build that inner capacity in life to handle everything that life throws at you.
That's a lot of science about what's happening inside the brain with around consistency. But let's sort of transition a little bit into how we apply all these theories and the science into real life. Your brain rewires, habits form, identity shifts, capacity grows. That's all real. That's what the science says.
Real world application. Let's get into a few different areas here. One is just habits and routines. So this is obviously like the most obvious one, daily routines. You set one, morning workout, meditation, journaling. First week, you're locked in. Second week, you might still be good. Week 3, something comes up, life happens, you miss it, and then it's gone. So what's actually happening there is your habit hasn't hasn't hit that pace yet, right? Where you're still in the decision-making phase, where it still requires willpower, and willpower is a limited resource. So once you hit decision fatigue and life comes at you, that's where it's very easy to lose the habit.
Right. So the shift comes when we stop relying on motivation to get started. We stack the habit to something that's already automatic. So if and the example I think that like James Clear makes in his book is, if you're making coffee every day and you want to start the habit of journaling, put your journal next to the coffee maker. So that habit that's already natural and built in is a habit stacker. And there's things for me where there's been habits I've started over time where I say, I'm not going to eat breakfast until I do this. And then when I wake up and I feel hungry, that immediately reminds me to do the habit, because it's a requirement I've put in place before I can eat. That's habits and routines. Another area is stress and emotional regulation. So let's talk about stress here. This is where we see consistency play out in really subtle but important ways. A lot of people have inconsistent relationships with their stress response, meaning some days they handle really well, and other days the same amount of stress completely derails them, and they don't always understand why.
Yeah, and what's usually happening is, like we talked about, their capacity hasn't been built consistently. So they haven't been practicing regulation. We're not breathing, pausing, reframing regularly enough for it to be automatic. So under real pressure, that's when the old default path takes over, right? But when you practice these tools consistently, even when you're not stressed, you build the neural pathway so it's available when you actually need it. You're training for the game, in other words, during practice. Now, that's stress and emotional regulation. Then you look at relationships. Relationships are actually one of the best examples of how consistency shapes identity and trust, because, again, trust isn't built in gigantic moments. It's built in small, repeated ones.
Showing up, following through, being emotionally present consistently. None of these are dramatic gestures, but over time they compound into something meaningful and deep. The person who texts to check in regularly, or the friend who follows through on what they say, that reliability is built by consistency. And we know the people in our lives, we trust those that are consistent, that consistently show up. And here's the flip side. When we're inconsistent in relationships, it's one of the most destabilizing things for the nervous system. So hot and cold, available, then distant, able to spend time with us, super busy. That inconsistency actually creates anxiety in the people in our lives.
Yeah, that's interesting. You look at it through the lens of relationships. So that's the domain of relationships. How about the domain of work and performance, Dave?
So in work and performance, consistency is what separates people who have big bursts of output from people who actually build things. The most successful people are those who are just consistent.
Yeah, we all know that consistent person, right? Incredible when they're inspired, but you can't. Or inconsistent person, I should say, when they're inspired by, you can't count on them, versus the person who isn't always the flashiest, but they're kind of that steady Eddie, right? They show up, they do the work, they improve steadily. Over a year, when you watch those two people, it's not even close.
What's happening under the hood and is this 1% better every day concept. So there's just this compounding effect. If you improve 1% every day over 365 days, that'll make you 37 times better. Those small daily gains, they compound, not always in a neat linear way every day, but in a way that becomes dramatic over time.
So this is the Mental Fitness Podcast. We always try to give really practical frameworks, tools. Let's get into one around consistency that you can actually use.
In the intro.
Yeah. Yes. The 3 R's you heard in the intro. We call this the 3 R's of consistency.
Return, reduce, and ritualize. The reason that we're we like this framework is it addresses the 3 actual points where consistency breaks down. So let's get into each of them. Return. What does that mean, Luke?
Yeah. The first R is return, not restart. It's return. So most people treat a missed day. I think this is very common, by the way. When you miss a day, you think of it as a failure. You're like, oh well, there goes my habit, or try not to do this thing. I failed. But that's the wrong mental model, because every consistent person has missed days. The variable isn't whether they miss, it's how fast they come back. So the R, return, means the first R, when you fall off, your only job is to show up again, not double up and do extra the next day because you missed, not punish yourself, just return as quickly as possible.
I like to think of it as like a GPS. If you take a wrong turn, then it doesn't take you back to the very beginning and start over. Just sort of recalculates and finds the best way to return and get back on path. So we should be the GPS. The second R is reduce, not quit. When life gets hard, and it will, the job isn't to quit, but just to reduce. So instead of 30 minutes of exercise, do 10. Or instead of a full journal entry, write 1 sentence. Or instead of a full meditation, just take 3 deep breaths. And that's not going backwards. That's keeping those neural pathways warm in your brain that are formed from that habit. You're keeping the identity vote active. So both from a physiological standpoint of what's happening in the brain and from a psychological standpoint of what you're telling yourself, if you can reduce it and stay consistent, you're voting for that new habit.
Yeah, I really like that. The reduce, right? Because the minimum viable version of whatever habit you're working on still counts. So, showing up at 10% is obviously better than not showing up at all, and you're kind of proving to yourself that you can show up. Now that's
been a big one for me personally. Yeah.
I love that one. The third R is ritualize. This is about taking the decision out of the equation. So pick a time, pick a trigger, build a context that becomes automatic, morning run after your alarm, 5-minute check-in after dinner. Maybe you build a system where you do a breathing exercise before big calls. And when that context triggers the behavior automatically, you don't have to decide, you just do. This is kind of like the habit stacking thing, or systemizing everything, right? Like you were saying, Dave.
And the reason for that is willpower runs out and decision fatigue is real. And so the goal of ritualization is to remove the decision entirely and just let the system run. And the one thing, if you start with nothing else today, start with the R that's hardest for you of those 3 R's: return, reduce, ritualize. Are you someone who quits when you fall off? Start with return. Or are you someone who tries to do too much and burns out? Start with reduce. Or are you inconsistent because it's never the same time? Then start with ritualize. Yeah, so I think that just identifying which one is best for you to start. So let's just talk about some of the traps, because these are the things that kill consistency even when people understand everything that we just talked about.
Yeah, and the 3 R's are kind of antidotes, I guess, for these traps in some ways, right? Because the first pitfall or trap people fall into is the all or nothing trap, and this is probably one of the biggest ones. This all or nothing thinking. I've missed Monday, so the week is ruined. This is the single most common reason people fall off, and it's entirely a mental construct we've made up in our mind, right? Because perfectionism is the enemy of consistency. Those two don't go together. So when you're doing something consistently, it's always better than done perfectly and sporadically, always.
Yeah, and another pitfall, which is one that I've fallen into a lot in the past, is starting too big. Every January 1st, massive New Year's resolutions, complete life transformation. I go from zero to a complete overhaul. And That almost never works. And it's not a discipline problem, it's really a design problem. Our nervous system it resists dramatic change. That's just the way we're wired. Small changes kind of fly under the radar, and they're easier to implement. Small changes implemented over time. A 10-minute walk every day compounds differently than a 90-minute workout that you can only sustain for 8 days. If you could do the 10-minute walk every day for a year, you're going to be better off doing that than trying this, going from no movement to I'm going to do this intense 90-minute workout every day, because you're only going to stick with that for a few days or a couple weeks. All right, this show is all about mental fitness, and here's something most of us don't admit. Everyone has those moments when you feel overwhelmed, stuck, or unsure, and what's actually going on in your head. That's why we built New. New is a mental fitness platform designed to help you clear your thoughts, reflect, notice patterns, develop habits, and get support that fits who you are. It remembers your goals, your wins, the things you're working on, and helps you stay on track. Not therapy, not toxic positivity, just real support when you need it. If you want to be part of the early access group, head to talkwithnew.com. That's talkwithnue.com. Sign up now and get 3 months free.
The third one is, and this is an important one as well, is waiting to feel motivated before acting. Motivation actually follows action. It's not the other way around. You'll never feel consistent. You'll never consistently feel like doing the thing. The people who are most consistent aren't more motivated. They've just stopped waiting to feel like it. They've made it non-negotiable. Yeah.
So discipline is doing the thing when you don't feel like it. But here's the catch. The more you do it when you don't feel like it, the less often you don't feel like it. That's because the habit is being formed. So every time you do it when you don't feel like it, that's a really strong vote for the kind of person you want to become. But it's also doing a lot to tear down the resistance in your own brain and build that pathway where it's easier to do. That which we do over time becomes easier for us to do. For me, I just want to be honest about where I've struggled with this personally, because I think it's important. So I've had ADD and or ADHD, for me, people with ADHD struggle with consistency. The personal key for me of all the stuff we've talked about today, there's really kind of 3 things that have helped me the most. And that's so I need structure and systems in place. It's the ritualize. The things that I'm good at and consistent at are things that I've ritualized. Same time, same place, put those things in place. The other one is this idea that when you can't win the day, just don't lose it. It's a quote from James Clear, that basically a small, imperfect effort keeps the habit alive. And this for me is particularly around exercise. There's just some days I'm just tired or sore and I just don't feel like going on that 30 or 40-minute run. But if I can just put on my shoes and go for a mile run, that's infinitely better than skipping. And that kind of goes to reducing. But and then the third one, so I guess for me, the ritualize and the reduce are of the 3 R's or the 2. And then the third thing for me that I've just learned throughout my life is giving myself grace. I guess it's sort of related to what I just talked about reducing, but any effort is better than no effort. And just like the idea, a really powerful idea is never skip twice. And I love that idea because it allows for imperfections without judgment, but it also keeps me going. So if there's a habit I'm trying to form or something that I really believe in I should do every day and I miss it one day, instead of being upset or frustrated or, I have to start over, I guess this is kind of the return R for me. It's just okay, that's fine. Just don't skip twice. It's okay. Things happen. But those are for me, where I've really struggled with consistency. It's just, I guess I'm realizing it as I'm saying it, but those are the 3 R's.
I know, you perfectly framed it.
I was thinking it's really only 1 or 2 of the R's that apply to me, but I guess it really is those 3 R's. But the way that I've applied it for me, the way I reframe the return is give myself grace. Just just get back on without any judgment of self. And the way reduce is just, a small amount of the goal is infinitely better than skipping. And then the ritualize, that's been the biggest one for me. What about you?
Well, in prepping for this episode, I've really tried to internalize a lot of these things and think about how I view consistency and how it's molded over the years. So I'll try to give you a glimpse into my brain. It's not going to be as well formatted or thought out as yours was, Dave. But one thing I've realized about myself is I have a really pragmatic brain. So my old way of thinking was very zoomed in, meaning if I'm doing something, I'm not seeing results, relatively quickly. I start thinking, why am I doing this thing? And the problem is
21 days, after the 21 days, it's not working.
Yeah, it could be 21 days. It could be 2 days or a month, right? So the problem is most of these things that actually matter in life that are meaningful, mental fitness, habits, relationships, your physical health, they don't show results right away. The results are happening. They're just too small to see in the beginning. So I had to stop relying on results. I had to start relying on systems, just showing up, staying consistent, trusting that it's compounding. But when I was thinking about this, another really big piece for me personally is simply educating myself so I could actually understand how these things work. And what I mean by that is, take the gym, for example. If you know what to expect after a month, I'm talking about like results, or 6 months or a year, now you're not guessing anymore. You have a rough framework. You have a strategy you can follow and check in over time to see how you're actually progressing. And I personally think that's really important because consistency and strategy are two different things. If you're not consistent, nothing will ever work. But if you're consistent and you're still not progressing, now it's not a consistency problem, it's a strategy problem. And consistency is what gives you the data to even know what to change. So for me, it's really been these two things: understanding that most meaningful results are delayed. Most meaningful things in life have results that are delayed. And then educating myself on how the process and how these systems actually work. So at least in my mind, I have a framework I can follow. And then, but the most important thing, of course, is using consistency as the constant, that unchanging factor that you'll do no matter what. That allows me to actually evaluate whether what I'm doing is working over time.
That's interesting what you said. When you're saying that, all the stuff that you've had to teach yourself, I'm thinking I'm always trying to teach my boys that. And it reminded me of something, probably one thing I would add for me that has been a key to success in consistency is, and we didn't really talk about this at all, but adding an accountability partner. And where I've seen this recently, and it'll relate how what you said reminded me of things I always tell my sons, and how this accountability partner thing. So I started doing a workout every morning with my 11-year-old son. We lift weights for 30 minutes. It's not long. It's the it's the window of time that he has before school. He wanted to start doing with me, so we do it. We lift weights 6 days a week for 30 minutes. What's great about that is we hold each other accountable. So at first, I was his accountability partner. All right, Jacob, it's time to do weights. And the whole time we're doing weights, I'm telling him all the things that you just said. Hey, you're not going to see any difference for the first couple weeks, first couple months, right? But then we start to see the weight numbers going up, and he starts to build confidence. But what I found that's interesting for me is, man, there are days I just do not feel like lifting weights. I'm tired, but there's no way I can skip because I'm accountable to my son. Like this is part of the rituals, we do it together. And it made me realize that some of the rituals where I've been really successful is when I have someone that I do it with, whether it's my wife or one of my kids or a coworker or something, the things that I can do with someone else, because there's sometimes when my motivation lacks, but there's no way I can let down my son because he's expecting me. Now he's the one saying, come on, Dad, let's go. And so I think that was just a concept that sort of, as you were talking, that I realized was also helpful for me.
No, that's true. I think that's accountability is a massive one. There's definitely like some social psychology there. I think it's what you're saying is important to have accountability with someone meaningful to you, or like where you have a relationship of trust. It can't just be anyone random.
Yeah, or share your goals with people you live with.
Yeah,
it's kind of scary because then all of a sudden they're like, "Wait, why are you eating that chocolate? I thought you said you were going to not do that." But
exactly,
positive peer pressure.
Let's bring it home. Here's what we covered today. One, consistency rewires your brain. Every repetition physically strengthens those neural pathways. You're not just practicing a new behavior, you're building the architecture for it. Two, habits form through repetition in context. So not in 21 days, on average 66. Like you said, Dave, some might be sooner, some might be later. Subject to people, but the key isn't perfection, it's persistent return. 3, consistency shapes who you become, the identity piece. Every action is a vote for the person you're turning into. And then the 4th main point, consistency builds capacity. Emotional regulation, stress tolerance, resilience. These aren't traits you have, they're capacities you build through repetition.
Right. If there's one thing to take away with you from today, it's this: mental fitness isn't built in big moments. It's built in small moments, repeated enough times to change who you are. My favorite quote is from Ralph Waldo Emerson: "That which you persist in doing becomes easier for you to do. Not that the nature of the thing itself has changed, but your ability to do so is increased."
I love that. So here's what we want to leave with you today. What is one thing, one small thing you've been inconsistent with that actually matters to you? Not 10 things, just pick one. And what would it look like to return to it this week, even in the smallest, most minimum viable form?
And that's where it starts. Not a perfect plan, just with one return.